YouTube is full of videos discussing the best MMA comebacks of all time. This is because it's insanely cool to see a fighter you've been following and hyping over, who has dropped out for whatever reason, come back and storm through all the new faces that were hoping to overwrite your favorite fighter. While it's really cool in theory, comebacks don't always go as smoothly. In fact, sometimes they can be downright terrible. There are fighters who should have left while they were at the top, and they would have been remembered as some of the best, but they ruined the love people had for them, trying to squeeze out what little juice was left inside of them for a chance at some more cash or fame. Hello, and welcome back to SBTB. Today, we'll be covering the worst UFC comebacks of all time, just because no one else will. Before we continue, if you're into these kinds of videos and would like to know more about the latest news, fights, and fighters in the world of MMA, make sure to subscribe to our channel, as that's exactly what we're all about. With that said, let's get inside the cage and reveal the worst UFC comebacks of all time. 3, 2, 1, fight! Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey is one of the fighters that had a ton of hype surrounding them, but did nothing with it. She was the first ever female fighter to be signed in the UFC, and because of this, she was given the title. Her skills were hyped up due to her performance on Strikeforce, and she even did quite well in her first few matches. Since entering the UFC, she won a total of 6 fights, until she fought Holly Holm and got knocked out, losing her title. After this happened, Ronda was never the same. She got depressed, did a WWE cameo, and was almost leaning towards never fighting again. Dana White, however, being the sweet tongue that he is, convinced her to come back and fight rising star Amanda Nunes. The idea was to give Rousey her confidence back and to get her back at the top, but it turned out that this was the one that completely shattered her psyche. It was already apparent that she had given up before the fight. The fight only further de-escalated the Rousey hype as she lost in 48 seconds, getting clobbered by Nunes and losing in the most miserable way possible. This led Ronda to quit fighting for good, which wasn't good news for anyone. On the bright side, Nunes got a huge step up from this, so it's not a complete loss for the fans. Renzo Gracie. As a representative of the great Gracie family, Renzo is quite the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master, being a 6th Dan, or in other words, a 6th-degree black belt in BJJ. His UFC score was a bit controversial, as he won a fight against Frank Shamrock due to a disqualification, with which Renzo didn't seem to have any issues taking advantage of. After some hate, Gracie decided to drop out and didn't fight at all for 3 years. Then he came back to the UFC, even though many were saying he's out of shape and too old to compete. However, this didn't stop Gracie, and he went in full force, only to lose his first fight since he was back against Matt Hughes. He then went on to lose a couple more fights, and it was clear that his light was out. The 43-year-old was battered inside the Octagon by the new shining stars, and it was no contest. Even so, he's one of the people that simply loves being in the cage and duking it out, so losing a couple of fights isn't something that'll bring him down mentally. Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell was a legend within the MMA community. He had beaten some big names, yes, but he's most famous for being the fighter that everyone was worried for. Yes, you heard right. Not worried about, worried for. Liddell adopting a fighting style that often led him to being injured and badly damaged. At the end of his career, even Dana White himself was begging the Iceman to retire. In 2010, Liddell decided to finally pay some attention to reality and left the UFC announcing his retirement, which was a huge relief to everyone, his team, the UFC, and the fans themselves. But just like there are no retired cops, there are no retired MMA Icemen, and Liddell just goes on to further prove this point. He couldn't hold himself back from experiencing one final fight with Tito Ortiz. This, of course, ended with Ortiz taking Liddell out in the first round, so it was definitely one of the more unimpressive comebacks in the UFC. But that's just a regular unsuccessful comeback. The true title of the most impressively unimpressive comeback ever goes to BJ Penn. The prodigy, BJ Penn. He was a crowd favorite, and for good reason. He used to be the best. Penn was one of the first fighters to win titles in 2 different weight classes, that being welterweight and lightweight. In fact, a big part of his appeal was that he was one of the leading figures in saving the lightweight division from extinction. At the time, heavyweight was where it was at, and the idea of watching normal people in the cage wasn't as appealing. But Penn showed fans that guerrilla fights aren't all there is to MMA, and fans just loved him and his emotional wins. He went on to dominate dominate the welterweight division and got a shot at fighting the 5-time defending champion Matt Hughes. Hughes was a favorite for the fight as his skill was undeniable at the time, and even though all the odds were against BJ, he still managed to win the match with a rear naked choke in the first round. But then BJ Penn left the UFC. Yes, he left the UFC claiming the competition isn't good enough. He went on to fight in some other companies, including some K1 promotions. After fighting for a while, Penn was finally announced to be coming back to the UFC under the condition that he's the #1 contender. He fought George St. Pierre and lost via split decision, even though many believe he clearly should have won. After this, he went back down to lightweight. He then went and won the lightweight championship and went back to welterweight to fight St. Pierre yet again. But this time, he lost quite clearly. And this is when BJ started going downhill. He then went on to have a few successful title defenses in lightweight, but it was visible that he had lost his edge. After he lost the lightweight championship, he had his last glimmer of hope, knocking out Matt Hughes and reclaiming the welterweight title. And that was it for BJ Penn. After this, Penn didn't have a single win from 2011 up till 2019. He went on to have one of the longest losing streaks in MMA and one of the saddest careers ever. It's really too bad, as he did have a lot of skill, but in the harsh UFC conditions, not everyone can survive. All in all, this just goes to show that sometimes people retire for a reason. While it is commendable that some still have the heart to fight, sometimes you also have to be smart about it. We still wish these fighters the best and hope they're doing well. Ronda Rousey is currently signed with the WWE, but hasn't wrestled since losing her women's championship there. BJ Penn is currently in Hawaii and has had some troubles with charges against him for unaddressed reasons, but these charges have recently been dropped, so it's all good for Baby J. I honestly hope to not see these fighters in the Octagon again, except for maybe Ronda, but they may decide to pull one over on the world yet again. Who knows? And there you have it right there, fight fans, the worst UFC comebacks of all time. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to our channel as we release new MMA-related videos all the time. If we missed any other horrible UFC comeback, make sure to tell us down in the comments below. With that said, we'll be taking our leave, so as always, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.